A simple question from me. How do you see the future of Singapore, given its recent tension with China?
What's your thinking about Singapore, the future of Singapore, with regards to this recent tension with China, please?
Singapore is where all ships must turn when they move from one ocean to the other. And because of its geographical location, somewhere around Singapore will always be an important station for the maritime trade. And this goes back to the early mist of time. When Zheng He went to the Indian Ocean, his fleets all passed through Singapore. Singapore was known as Dongyamen. When the British opened up the China trade, first Calcutta, then Penang, then Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai. In this century, we will see a huge revival of the China trade on a scale never seen before. And Singapore is right there. It's a position for Singapore to lose. So I think Singapore will benefit hugely from the China trade. The problem of Singapore's relations with China is Singapore's Chineseness. It is 3/4 Chinese. And in a Southeast Asia where Chinese businessmen are dominant and therefore often disliked, one Thai king described the Chinese as the Jews of Southeast Asia. But the Jews don't have an Israel which is the size of China. There's a difference. And because of that, Singapore's foreign policy requires it to make it more than clear that it is not an appendage of China, that it has its own sovereign independence. But because of the cultural similarity, when mainland people come to Singapore, they feel at home. When Singapore people go to China, they are given quasi-Chinese status. And this leads to sometimes expectations which collide against China's formal position to be independent and to be seen by our neighbors to be independent. So the present conflict that you talk about is a reflection of this tension. And the greater the tension between the US and China, the tighter Singapore's position becomes. But if the two have good relations, Singapore will be in a delightful position. But Singapore is far away from China. The distance from Singapore to Hong Kong is that between London and Moscow. So Singapore's position is always in Southeast Asia. Singapore's destiny is in Southeast Asia and in the China trade. And therein lies the tension, which has to be managed, which will not go away. I'm not making light of the present problems. Anthony talked about the TEDx, the 9 armored cars, which are now incurring demurrage costs in warehouses in Tuen Mun. I read that Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has written to Chief Executive Siva Leong, but we all know that this matter will not be decided in Hong Kong, it will be decided in Beijing. Beijing says you have to follow the law, whatever that means. You must also observe the One China policy, which means you can't have the kind of relations we now have with Taiwan, which Beijing had for a long time acquiesced to. I think China is sending a signal, which either Singapore is not seeing as a signal, or doesn't want to receive as a signal. But I suppose we have to watch this space.
Thank you.
Yes, Ken.
Hi, George. This is Kevin. I have a question that during the time of rapidly political change and economic change, what's your advice for a younger generation, especially the younger, well, not that young, but people like me, right, 30 years old, who were born in China, but have a Western educated experience and now come back to China to start a political or things like that. What's your advice for us, especially for those who are very patriotic, and what's your advice of what we can do to help the situation and give our contribution?
There is a big issue of identity in the world today. There was a period when, after Westphalia, when human beings were collected behind nation states with sharp boundaries, then patriotism became a dominant value, and nationalism became nationalism based upon states, not based upon tribes. But with growing porosity and globalization and mobility, patriotism has weakened, and human beings now insist on multiple loyalties and affiliations. So I say you are a Chinese, you are from Wenzhou, you are Christian, you're American. And someone tells you must choose. Which is the more important identity, that you're Wenzhou or that you're Chinese? How do you answer that question? You must choose between being Cantonese and being Chinese. It's an outrageous question. Choose between being Chinese and being Christian. We have affiliations to Harvard, to Hong Kong, to our tribe, to our religion, to our family. And in this intensely networked world, success depends on the ability to operate networks which are almost neural in their construction, as complex as neural networks in the construction. And the more we're able to manage multiple loyalties, the better we're able to access talent, markets, capital. If, as a government, or as an association, or as a university, we insist on homogeneity, exclusive loyalty, we will have very few members. From that perspective, the American ideal is very inspiring. I mean, we're from Harvard. We're not American citizens, but we get to vote. When I first received the ballot slips, I thought, wow, I can really vote. Can you imagine Beta doing that? Or Oxford, Cambridge doing that? So what is it in the American psyche which makes them consider this to be, no, this is not exceptional? I had a son, my wife is here, we had a son who was treated in St. Jude General Research Hospital in Memphis. There were many months there. The treatment must have cost over $1 million. We did not pay a cent because it's a research hospital, and they did not want the cost of drugs to affect the decision of parents. And some antifungal drugs which were administered to my son, they cost $1,000 a shot. You could use other cheaper versions, but they are a research hospital. It's the biggest charity in America. Why should they help foreigners? The doctors told me that there was a child from Mexico, illegal migrant, very sick. They can't treat the child without the mother. But that lad is illegal, so how do you bring the mother in? So they petitioned Senator Edward Kennedy. He got the mother in. But there's something special in the American psyche, you know? And which is why, even though we are from different countries, when Harvard says, look, we have an event, you got to speak, oh, we jump to it. It's an loyalty. So this multiple loyalties is something which has to be fought for, because the world is now going through a dangerous phase where globalization threatens. So people feel deeply uncomfortable. So they go back to what? To their roots, turning them against the other. In Europe now, in many countries, politics have turned visceral, have turned tribal. And this may well define the world in the next 10, 20 years. A contest between a tolerance, a celebration of multiple identities, and one who says, look, you must choose. And we get ourselves in different corners.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. I thought they were brilliant. I think your analysis of the national security situation is exactly right. And the origins of American expansionism and the origins of Chinese sort of inward-looking being part of their cultures and history, I think is fascinating and poorly understood by Americans. I completely agree. The question that I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on is on economic policy, where by definition, so you can't just have a situation where China protects itself or its own interests. By definition, its actions will transmit across countries. So, for example, my family's in the steel business in the Midwest of America, and so China, of course, produces over 50% of the world's supply of steel. So, actions here will inexorably affect, by definition, and so. And I think that's a source of what's going on in the U.S. And so I'm sort of interested to hear your thoughts on what do you think the U.S.'s response should be on economic issues, one, like that, and then two, do you worry at all about those economic issues sort of escalating and transmitting into sort of bigger national security issues?
I was trade minister for many years and became intimately involved in negotiating free trade agreements, including one in the U.S., with Bob Zelig, and also being involved in negotiations in the WTO for the launch of a new round, and we have failed miserably. I think the US should be tough with China on trade, and China will be tough with the US on trade. But this is what trade officials are paid to do. This is our profession. Our job is to be tough and negotiate fair rules, and to look after our own side, but there must also be a certain wisdom that in defending my own side, I'm not defending all industries at the expense of new ones. I must know where I should be on the offensive and where I should be on the defensive. When I negotiated the free trade agreement with the US put enormous pressure on us, on intellectual property. And my people were so angry, so they came to me and said, look, they are completely unreasonable. They are going to overturn everything that we now hold dear. I said, no, let's think about it. Is our future in intellectual property? They said, yes. Then why are we in conflict? So once we took that different direction, we had a very good free trade agreement, which till today is a gold standard in the Asia Pacific. And Singapore's protection of intellectual property has made it a very attractive place to invest in. Many people operating in China keep the intellectual property in Singapore. They may make 95% in China, but certain critical bits they keep in Singapore because they know if it's in China, it's very difficult to protect intellectual property, not because the Chinese do it to foreigners, but because they do it to everybody. And one reason why China is what it is because internal competition within China is the most ferocious in the world. And it's most favored nation treatment. They do to you what they do to themselves.
George, what advice would you, or you have been giving to the Xi to handle the new U.S. administration?
No, I was asking George for his view. What advice would he or he has been giving to the Chinese president to the way deal with the new U.S. administration?
Well, I understand. This is an exam question.